Good evening and welcome to Current Issues. I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. In the second hour, we will have Professor James Petras with us. Professor Petras is a professor of sociology at Binghamton University, former professor of sociology in New York, and he's the author of 62 books published in 29 languages. I think there are more than 62 now, and over 560 articles in professional journals, including the American Sociological Review, British Journal of Sociology, Social Research, and Journal of Peasant Studies. He has published over 2,000 articles in non-professional journals, such as the New York Times, The Guardian, The Nation, Christian Science Monitor, Foreign Policy, New Left Review, Partition Review, Thames Modern, Le Monde, and his commentary is widely carried on the internet. What we're going to talk to Professor Petras, ladies and gentlemen, is very much what we had talked about in the first hour with Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, but with Professor Petras we're going to be more specific about AIPAC, which it stands for, those of you who hear it for the first time, it does stand for American Israel Public Affairs Committee. And this particular committee, ladies and gentlemen, it's very powerful. What they do is they very much bribe, they very much force and pressure our congressmen into submitting to their agenda. And their agenda is Israel's agenda. If you do understand what's going on, you see, when it comes to AIPAC, any congressman or senator, and they will tell them, look, we don't care how you go on domestic issues. We don't care how you vote on Social Security, on health care, on whatever. We don't care how you vote on that. But when it comes to foreign policy, and especially when it comes to Israel and the Middle East, you better do like we tell you, or you're going to be out. Congressman McKinley just lost her primary in Georgia, basically because she opposed them. She opposed AIPAC. And recently, one of the congressmen criticized Israel in Lebanon of what they had done, basically murdering little babies, and he got a visit from AIPAC. Well, he apologized. He told him, I'm sorry. I did not know you were going to get that upset. You know, he just criticized what Israel have done. This is basically how the United States is run, ladies and gentlemen. They don't really care who is in the office. All they do care about is this person in the office, in the congressman or a senator or even a president better do what we say or he's going to be out.
Not very strong.
That's exactly how George Bush made it to be the president of the United States. And you do know how powerful they are from the Monica Lewinsky case, where, if you remember the peace process that President Clinton started, well, he did not start, but he very much got going more than anyone else, and actually got an agreement and a handshake in front of the White House between the late President Arafat and Ishaq Rabin, the former and late Prime Minister. But also he was actually pressuring, the neocons thought that he was pressuring the Israelis a little bit too much on this two-state solution, and and also his wife, who is hoping to be the next president of the United States, made a statement one time that really the Palestinians need to have a state of their own. Before you know it, we really had a problem. Well, they had a problem. The Lewinsky problem was presented to you even after 2 years since the time it took place had passed. They still had the dress that apparently was an evidence to what happened. But anyhow, I don't want to go on. We are going to go to I believe we have the professor with us. Professor Petras, are you with me? Can you hear me? Professor, can you hear me?
Very weakly.
Okay. What about now?
Little better. Can you speak louder?
Okay, I sure can. Welcome to the program,
Yeah,
sir.
that's good.
Welcome to the program.
Yes.
Very good. Professor Petras, I know you have wrote a lot of articles and a lot of many books, a lot of them about what's going on in the world, especially what's going on in the Middle East. And lately you had published a book which tells us about the power of Israel in the United States. Can you briefly just tell me what your book is all about, what the thesis was in your book?
Our book deals with the role that the Israeli lobby in what is called in Israel the Jewish lobby in the United States, the influence that it has on U.S. policy in the Middle East. It details the role that the influentials of the pro-Israeli influentials have in the Bush administration in shaping policy toward the war with Iraq. The architects of that war were people like Wolfowitz, who was the second in command in the Pentagon, Douglas Feith, who was number 3. You had people like Elliot Abrams, who is now chief advisor to President Bush on Middle Eastern issues. All these people are fanatical Zionists. They have been active in support of Israel. In fact, Feith and Wolfowitz were accused of passing documents to Israel in the 80s. Mr. Elliot Abrams is a fanatic believer in Jewish purity. He's violently opposed to assimilationist Jews. He has been a strong supporter of the and promoter of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, according to Mr. Hirsch in his recent article in the New Yorker. We also have Mr. Frum, who was the writer, a speechwriter for Bush and author of the infamous Axis of Evil, who's another fanatical Zionist. We could run down the list of top people in the Bush administration, so that when we're talking about the power of Israel in my book, we're not just talking about political action committees, we're not just talking about AIPAC, we're talking about people in the government who are loyal to Israel first in shaping U.S. policy. And we're also talking beyond the AIPAC to the multiplicity of Jewish federations at the state, local level who converge with the political action committees and with the op-ed writers and people in the media to produce a very formidable force. So that's one big aspect of my book. The book is called The Power of Israel in the United States, published by Clarity Press, which will be out this month, the end of September. I urge your readers and listeners to get a copy of the book and see our discussion also of the infamous cartoon issue. The editor in Denmark who solicited that cartoon was originally from the Ukraine. He's a Jew, very pro-Israel. It was not an innocent gesture, as he put it, of testing censorship in Western Europe. He's a very close friend of the Mossad, which is extremely active in Denmark. So we have a account of that in the book, so that this deals not only with Israeli policy and how that policy is passed on to its U.S. representatives and how powerful these representatives are, but it also deals with the issue of Israel and its genocidal policies in Gaza, the destruction of an economy, of a society, and the assassination of over 200 Palestinians, one-third of them children, at the expense of destroying everything under the excuse of rescuing one soldier, which is an excuse because Israel in the past has always negotiated prisoner exchanges, both with Lebanese, with Hezbollah, with Palestinian groups. And we know that this is still going on. And moreover, they have secured the backing of the United States. I might add that in addition to the $2.8 billion that Israel gets every year from the U.S. taxpayers, they just secured $9 billion in co-signed loans by the United States government, and they're putting on the table that you and I and your listeners pay for Israel's war against Lebanon. They're looking at $3 billion more handout from us in order to rebuild the Israeli settlements in northern Israel, which were products of its own invasion and into Lebanon. So this is a endless pit. Whatever Israel engages in destructive activities around the world, we're expected to pay for it, and that's all in the book.
Okay. Professor, recently the Israeli ambassador to the United States, he stated that Israel was very careful not to hit civilians in Lebanon, but on the other hand, Hezbollah was targeting civilians. Can you tell our viewers about, I know you have written about this, can you give them an idea about the numbers dead on both sides and how many civilians and how many soldiers on both sides?
Yes, the Lebanon resistance, Hezbollah, killed approximately 114 Israeli soldiers and only 23 Israeli civilians. The Israelis, by the way, do not provide shelters for Arab Israelis, so almost half of the civilian deaths in Israel were Arab Christians or Muslims who didn't have shelters because the shelters are for Jews only. So anyway, the ratio is approximately 6 soldiers for each civilian killed on the part of Hezbollah. But when you look at the comparative data, Israel killed over 1,000 Lebanese civilians, many Christians as well as Muslims, and only killed 90 Hezbollah soldiers. So the ratio there was approximately 11-to-1 of civilians to military. So we can say that Israel targeted civilians while Hezbollah targeted soldiers. This is very clear, and the Israeli ambassador once again is engaging in the big lie. He's reversing the story. It's Israel that was shooting accurate bombs at hospitals and schools and convoys of refugees and shooting up UN observers and human rights workers while the bulk of the Hezbollah rockets and gunfire was directed at the invading army of Israelis.
Okay, so basically they were not precision bombing. They were basically just mopping up, destroying buildings, apartment buildings. I've seen some pictures where
I think the Israelis were aiming precisely at civilian buildings. They were intending to provoke a civil war. They hoped to inflict so much damage on the Lebanese population in the hopes that the Lebanese would turn against Hezbollah. And this backfired. Instead of provoking a civil war, the Israelis unified all the Lebanese across their sectarian, religious, and ethnic differences. So this strategy of Israel of saturation bombing of civilian sites, it backfired. It unified instead of dividing the Lebanese, and they failed to provoke the civil war, which they hoped to reignite as they did in the 70s and 80s.
Now, what do you think would happen in Lebanon now? Do you think that the policy of Hezbollah and, of course, Syria and Iran would be the dominant policy now in the Middle East?
Well, I think what you have to look at is first how the Zionist lobby presented the Bush administration with a document which it then imposed in the UN Security Council, which effectively gave Israel everything that it couldn't get through the war. Essentially, the UN was told to form a buffer in Lebanon instead of a buffer in Israel, which after all is the invading country. If you're going to set up a peace buffer, you set up the buffer in the territory of an invading, aggressive, bomb-crazy country. Second of all, it stipulated that the UN and the Lebanese government should disarm Hezbollah and not the Israeli army, which actually carried out the aggressive action. Hezbollah was fighting on its own turf, defending its villages, its communities, its hospitals and churches, and yet they are supposed to be the ones that get disarmed. This is very perverse. Thirdly, it wants the borders closed so that Israel can get another $3 billion worth of arms from the United States in order to attack and destroy Arab countries, but that the Arab countries cannot secure arms to defend themselves from forthcoming Israeli aggression. So the UN resolution is extraordinarily one-sided. It was authored by the Zionist lobby in the United States and passed off in the Security Council as a U.S. resolution, and the United Nations Security Council approved this resolution. And at the same time, Israel has not moved any of its soldiers from the Lebanese occupation, while the Hezbollah has withdrawn its arms from the areas in which the United Nations security forces are now occupying. So Israel continues its occupation, it continues its blockade of Lebanon, the air blockade, the seacoast blockade, despite the pleas of the Europeans, the United Nations, Kofi the Gopher Annan. They just ignore everybody because of the power of the Jewish lobby in the United States. They have the backing of Washington to stick their fingers in the eyes of the rest of the world. Let me add one thing more that I think the U.S. public has not been informed of. 3 days before the ceasefire, when it was evident to everyone that the ceasefire was going to be put in place, Israel dropped 100,000 cluster bombs onto Lebanon. These are bombs that blow up shrapnel and kill everybody within 30 meters of their target. There are 100,000 of these cluster bombs, illegal anti-civilian cluster bombs, now in Lebanon, thanks to this sneak attack a couple days before the onset of the ceasefire. That is an act of craven cruelty beyond the imagination of any rational, civilized government in the world.
Now, Professor,
not a peep from the great progressive Jewish lobby in the United States. Not a single word from all the major Jewish organizations in the United States.
Now, Professor, let's just explain to our viewers, we are looking at a cluster bomb now. Let's explain to our viewers what a cluster bomb is and why is it illegal to use in the world.
Cluster bombs contain thousands of little shrapnel and little bomblets that when they explode, they spread horizontally and decapitate and dismember anyone in the vicinity. Many of these cluster bombs did not explode when they hit the ground. They're canisters that don't explode, and already over 115 Lebanese children and adults and farmers who are beginning to move back into their neighborhoods and farms have been maimed and murdered by this deliberate act of wanton criminal behavior by the Israeli state, a deliberate act of atrocity on the civilian population, because these bombs were put in towns, in villages, on farms, on roadways. This had nothing to do with militarism. It had everything to do with a vile sense of cruelty to the Lebanese people, as if they hadn't suffered enough from the 177,000 missiles and 5-ton bombs that Israel had used to destroy over 15,000 houses and apartments in Lebanon.
Okay. Professor, stay with me. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to go to the phones. We are speaking with Professor James Petras. Let's go to the phones with, we're going to Canada with Ramsey. Go ahead, Ramsey.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Hi.
Sir, I just want to tell you something, sir. I really liked how you scheduled your show, because you have Professor Petras, who knows everything you said is right to the last detail, like 100%. And last week you had Noam Chomsky, who had absolutely no idea what he was talking about regarding U.S. foreign policy, because he believes that the Jewish lobby is just like any other lobby, which is completely nonsense. The Jewish lobby is the most powerful lobby in the United States government. And sir, Professor Petras wrote an article called "The Noam Chomsky and the Pro-Israeli Lobby: 14 Erroneous Thesis" on April 3rd, 2006, and he completely refutes Chomsky's nonsense. And Chomsky is overrated, and and so on. And so another point I'd like to ask Professor Petras is that what is the and sir, and this is also a question for you, like a question for both of you. Like, can we talk about what happened with the Palestinian ministers that were arrested by Israel?
Okay, very good. Thank you, Ramzi. Professor, did you hear his comment?
No, I couldn't.
Okay. He said on April 3rd, 2006, you had written an article about Chomsky and his nonsense about 9/11. How do you take Chomsky's comments on 9/11 to mean?
I was not writing about Chomsky on 9/11. I was writing about Chomsky's ignorance of the role of the Jewish lobby in shaping U.S. Middle East.
I think that's what the caller said. Yes, that's exactly what he said.
And I think what is wrong with Chomsky's thesis is he ignores the tremendous influence of the pro-Israelis inside the government. He never discusses the role of people like Wolfowitz, Feith, Pearl, Elliot Abrams, long-term close collaborators with the Israeli government. They worked for the Israeli government. They advised the Israeli government. They designed programs for the Israeli government, and they were instrumental in shaping the policy of the Iraqi invasion. Now, how can a brilliant man like Chomsky overlook the role of key policymakers with long-term affiliations to Israel? What is wrong with the man? He's a very intelligent critic of U.S. policy when it deals with non-Jews connected to Israel, and suddenly he develops absent-mindedness when it comes to dealing with policies with strategic attachments to the state of Israel. Secondly, he says that Israel is just a tool of the U.S. policy, when in fact it's Israel that gets $3 billion from the United States, not the United States from Israel. When it is Israel that has a big lobby in the United States, the U.S. doesn't have a lobby in Israel. When the Israeli lobby pressures U.S. Congress and gets 98% vote, Chomsky says they're not influential. I mean, he's not an imbecile. He's a very brilliant linguist and an astute critic of U.S. foreign policy in all areas except that which pertains to the role of the Jewish lobby in shaping U.S. Middle East policy. In the ultimate instance, I'm afraid that Chomsky's own Zionist affiliations and friendships in Israel distort his ability to analyze accurately the role of the Jewish lobby in shaping U.S. Middle Eastern policy.
Okay. Professor Petras, isn't it laughable when you watch Kofi Annan in Israel and he went to the Palestinian territories to ask for them or to demand that they release the one Israeli soldier they captured, and the day he got there, the Israelis killed 5 Palestinians, and the day he left, they killed 14 Palestinians. Isn't it laughable that what we see in the world, this thing that is called the United Nations, isn't it time for the United Nations to really close down its doors and go home?
Well, I think the role of Kofi Annan goes back a long time. I mean, Kofi Annan has been fronting for the U.S. for a long time, and it's gotten worse ever since his son was involved in the scandal, the oil for food program, and I think they probably have the goods on Kofi Annan's son, and therefore he's become even more servile. You might ask why Kofi Annan didn't ask the Israelis to free up the 9,000 Palestinian and Lebanese prisoners most of whom have been held without trial and without charges. 9,000 people, some of them held for up to 10 years. Many of them children and women who have never been accused of any crime being held in jail. Kofi the Gopher, as I call him, because he's a gopher. He carries messages from the Jewish lobby to the Palestinians. But he never decides to question Israeli policy, just like Jesse Jackson, another bagman from Washington, who said he's going to the Middle East to try to free the Israeli prisoners. He, too, won't ask Israel to free the Lebanese prisoners.
What about one-third of the Palestinian cabinet actually was kidnapped by Israel? Did they ask Israel to free those? I mean, those are democratically elected people, and they kidnapped one-third of the cabinet. They sit in Israeli jails, and the United Nations is not asking Israel to free them.
Well, there's been some protests among some of the European states. There's been a number of protests by parliamentarians in the European Union. There is a good deal of indignation. But you see, there has been no outcry from the pro-U.S. Arab rulers, Saudi Arabia, the monarch in Jordan, Hassan, or in Egypt, Mubarak, because they are afraid of the example of a democratically elected Hamas government, which shows up their corrupt dictatorship and flunkyism to both Israel and the United States. So they're not speaking up. The Israelis, of course, have the backing of the U.S. The U.S. has European governments under their thumb. So you have this political charade where elected representatives, as you mentioned, are jailed by the Israelis for no crime at all, except that they are democratically elected. And you have the so-called democratic governments looking the other way as they looked the other way during the dictatorships in South America, during the bloodletting in Central America, during the murderous regimes in Asia and the Philippines today. Why don't they say something about the death squads in the Philippines and Colombia? They have a political criteria by which they determine what kind of violations of democracy you can criticize and which kinds of violations of democracy you don't criticize. If a government is supporting the U.S. never criticized its political crimes. When a government's critical of the U.S., they bring a microscope and examine each and every procedure in order to find something to criticize.
Okay. Let's go back to the phones with James. Go ahead, James.
Hi, Hesham, thank you. Dr. Petras, it's James, your friend on the email. Listen, I couldn't just give you more accolades than what I just heard you on this program. Every single issue that you addressed, you and I are on the same page with. And also, with regard to what you mentioned about Chomsky, absolutely correct there. It's just been so frustrating. I had a call into him on Hesham's program or Dr. Tillawi's program last week, and I referred to him as holding up the left side of the Zionist lobby. I'd actually met him a few years ago in person in Los Angeles before the Iraq War started, and I talked to him about JINSA, the Jewish Institute for National Security Affairs, which you and I know is fully behind this war in Iraq and is trying to expand it out to Iran before long. And as soon as I mentioned it to him, he came back and said, yeah, did you hear what Woolsey said about World War IV and the neocon agenda? So he knew completely about JINSA. Yet I ask you, Dr. Petras, have you heard him write about JINSA once in any of his writings? And then he had the audacity last week to tell me that AIPAC was just another lobby and it was the corporations running the show. Well, I just had an email from Paul Finley, who wrote the excellent book about the pro-Israel lobby, They Dare to Speak Out, and he told me that's ridiculous. He said anybody who's been in Congress knows that the Jewish lobby has absolutely more influence than the oil lobby. But like I said, I think Chomsky is just on the left side of the Zionist lobby to take attention away from that strength that the pro-Israel lobby has that you've written about in your excellent book, which I'm going to get a copy of, by the way. So we don't focus on that. And lastly, he grew up in a Zionist household. And I mean, you know, how can we not address that as well?
Okay. Thank you, James.
Hello?
Any comments, Professor?
I can't hear him. You don't connect me to the radio listeners. I didn't hear what he said. What's the gist of his question?
Okay. He said that he... see, I had Chomsky here last week, and he did call him and ask him some questions about AIPAC and how Chomsky's look at AIPAC. He challenged him, and he said that Chomsky, you know, why doesn't Chomsky write? James think that Chomsky knows the truth about AIPAC. Why isn't he challenging AIPAC in his writings?
I have no idea. You have to ask him why he doesn't write about it. I suspect because he's got a bias. After all, he's a left-wing Zionist. He admits that. And I think while he's very critical of Israel, he doesn't want to criticize the forces in the United States which allows Israel to carry on its atrocities. So he aborts the analysis. He criticizes Israel's murder of Palestinians, its seizure of illegal lands, but he doesn't go to the root of the problem, which is Israel would not be able to commit all these crimes and maintain its standard of living without the backing of the U.S. government, and it gets the backing of the U.S. government at the cost of U.S. taxpayers and our democratic values because of the Jewish lobby in the United States. There's no other force in the United States that's pushing the Israeli agenda that Congress enacts. There's no other force that punishes congressmen for not supporting the Israeli agenda. Chomsky says that the U.S. is supporting Israel because it's in its interest. I mean, how can he say the U.S. has interest in Gaza? It has interest in the West Bank. It has interest in alienating all the Arab people and countries, huge markets compared to the puny consumption of Israel. I mean, this is not anything that a reasonable person would accept. And yet Chomsky, who is eminently reasonable on other questions, has a blind spot, which is not unusual. Many left and progressive intellectuals have a blind spot when it comes to criticizing their own country, their own ethnic group. They can criticize everybody, but when it comes to their group, and I'm referring to the Jews in America, Chomsky suddenly develops moral and political blindness. Here's this very moral person that suddenly turns a blind eye to higher immorality in the United States, where the whole problem resides. Can you imagine how many Jews would remain in Israel if their standard of living was cut in half, if all the doctors and dentists that go to Israel would not receive a free house, a subsidy, hire Filipino maids to clean their kids' backsides? I think you'd have massive outflow of well-to-do Israelis, professionals, nuclear physicists, etc. And the reason they stay there is because they get huge subsidies and privileges from the U.S. government. They have double citizenship. They get access to high technology before the U.S. military gets it. So how can you say that this is simply a non-factor in shaping Israeli policy?
Okay.
Ridiculous.
Okay, Professor, let's go back to the phones with, I believe, Freedom on one. Go ahead.
That line is...
Go ahead, Joel.
This is Freedom.
Okay, go ahead, Freedom.
Well, I would like to ask Mr. Petras a question. This is extremely important. I would like to know, Mr. Petras, today the president of Iran, Ahmadinejad, he refused to give up their nuclear program in Iran. And today, the USA Today had an article about the United States giving Israel, now listen to this, giving Israel 2 nuclear submarines, atomic submarines, along with the cruise missiles. Now that must cost at least $5 billion. I want to know this from you. If we gave Israel $1.2 billion for the Gaza settlements so they could move from Gaza, and if we're giving Israel $9 billion, as you just said, what is the true foreign aid that this country is giving Israel a year? If we're giving them submarines, bunker buster bombs, or $1.2 billion for the Gaza Strip settlements, and billions more, what is the true foreign aid that Israel is receiving from the taxpayers of the United States? And thank you very much.
Did you hear the question?
What is the true amount of foreign aid the United States gives to Israel?
Yes.
Well, if you add up all the duty-free exports that Israel gets, if you consider the hundreds of millions that Jews in the United States donate to Israel tax-free, if you think about the signed loans that the U.S. gives to Israel amounting to $11 billion, of which $9 billion is still on the table, Israel probably gets almost $1,000 per U.S. taxpayer a year. And their standard of living is higher than half of the U.S. population. I mean, how many of us have private gardeners, private swimming pools? How many of us get below minimum wage workers to work for us from foreign countries? I mean, we have some of those here. But we're talking about a very privileged society that's living off the largesse of a foreign country. They're not earning it. They talk about the Israeli miracle. That's pure BS. It's a rentier state. It's a state that lives off the work of others, that lives off the taxes of others, and most of these pro-Israeli philanthropists, they are exploiters, landlords, big businessmen, speculators. Where do they get their money from? U.S. workers. And then they're very generous in funding hospitals and military operations of the Israeli state, while in their own communities, nothing. They don't contribute. They don't put millions of dollars into financing the recovery of the people in New Orleans. I mean, instead of the U.S. giving billions of dollars to Israel, why doesn't Bush go down and rebuild New Orleans for the great majority of the poor people who are still scattered around the United States or living in trailers?
Okay.
This is outrageous. I want to tell you and your listeners one thing. The thing that outrages me the most about this whole issue is not Israel. It's the fact that the Jewish lobby has decided how and what we can discuss, what we can do regarding U.S. policy in the Middle East. I think it's incumbent upon all your listeners to stand up for America and tell the Israeli lobby, if you love it over there, go over there and take care of your people over there. But don't put the burden around our neck.
What's the Israeli connection to Iraq, Professor?
Iraq, they just designed the war. They were in charge of the whole hoax of weapons of mass destruction. Wolfowitz himself confessed that that was the only way to bring the United States around what he called securing a consensus on the war. He knew it was a fraud. Douglas Feist set up the Office of Special Planning, which cooked all the data that lied about the uranium that was smuggled from Africa. Libby was responsible for revealing the identity of the CIA agent to discredit Wilson, who went to Africa. Libby is a protege of Wolfowitz. Is a fanatical supporter of Richard Pearl and author of an infamous speech about the axis of evil that outlined Bush's strategy of warfare. In other words, the Jewish lobby in cahoots with civilian militarists like Cheney and Rumsfeld and other thugs like that were the principal architects, planners, and propagandists for the war, aided and abetted by the New York Times' Judith Miller, who lied about everything to do with Iraq, especially the weapons of mass destruction. Judith Miller is also a very ardent supporter of Israel and works closely with the Israeli Secret Service's Mossad, and was privy to every single policy that was coming down from Washington. This is the story of the Jewish lobby in Iraq. It's one of the great crimes of this new millennium.
Okay. Let's go back to the phones with Ramsey on one. Go ahead, Ramsey.
Hello, sir. This is Joel, Dr. Tillawi.
Yes, Joel, very quick.
Yes, quick comment. This information has been out since April of 2006. The House of Yahweh is bringing this information about nuclear war. The caller before mentioned about us bringing the war to Iran. And the nuclear war to start September the 12th, 2006. That's in 12 days. So everybody's, talking about when we're going to bring the war to Iran. Well, this information has been out since April of 2006. About September the 12th, 2006, nuclear war on and around the Euphrates River and on Iran. So that answers the question to everybody, when we're going to bring the war to Iran.
Okay.
And this is from the House of Yahweh. They also have a 1-800-613-9494.
Okay, well,
Thank you, Doctor.
All right. Well, I guess come September 12th, the House of Yahweh will be out of business. Okay, let's go to Ramsey on 3. Go ahead, Ramsey. Ramsey, you're on.
Hello?
Yes, you're on. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. I just want to say something, sir. You have to keep in mind, sir, that, Yuri Apney, the senator of the Israeli parliament, he said every senator and congressman knows that criticizing Israeli government is political suicide. And people like Chomsky on the left should know that. And, sir, I have a question for you. Sir, do you know a man named Walid Shobat?
Yes, I know him. I know all about him. He is fake. He has been going around on CNN. He is the brainchild of Daniel Pipes. I've checked on him. I even checked in Beit Sahur, where he said he was from. The man is fake, completely fake, and
yes, exactly.
Somebody sent me his book and DVD. I read some of it. I would love to debate this man. This man is fake, and it is the one who wrote the book is Daniel Pipes. If you read Daniel Pipes' writings and you read this book, you will see a lot of similarities. So he is fake.
Yes, sir. I was just going to say that. Yes, sir. Yes, my question to you was I would like to see this fake person you just mentioned on your show and debate him. But you just said that he won't come on your show because, sir, I checked this guy out, and this guy is he's like a puppet to the Jewish.
Well, he's not a puppet. He's not a puppet. He is fake. His whole thing is fake. I didn't want to mention anything about him because I really don't want to even give his name out. But he has been, and especially during the Lebanon war, where Israel attacked Lebanon, he was making the rounds big time on CNN, on Fox, on the right-wing talk shows. This man is fake. Everything he's saying is wrong and it's false, is a lie, a lie, and a lie. Thank you, Ramzi.
I agree. Yeah, sir, I have a question.
Go ahead, very quick.
Who are you talking about?
So my question was is that see people like Shobat and other people that they correlate between the Palestinian issue and Islamic ideology. So would you have a show on your program explaining that this has nothing to do with Islamic ideology, because people say that the West was attacked or the U.S. was attacked because the Muslims have an ideology to destroy the West, and this is completely rubbish.
Okay, we will have a show. We will have a show on that. Thank you, Ramzi.
Excuse me. Who is the fake person you're referring to?
There was a guy. His name is Walid Shwaybat. This man has been making the rounds on CNN and Fox, talking about that he was a Palestinian and supposedly a member of the PLO, and that he was in the Palestinian jihad movement, and then he figured out he converted into Christianity, I think, and supposedly he is talking bad about the Palestinians. This man is really, he is not well known, but after CNN and Fox put him on, a lot of people know who he is. He's full of garbage, and I would love to debate him, even though I think he's stupid, and he is the brainchild of Daniel Pipes. His name is Walid, W-A-L-I-D.
Never heard of him.
You don't want to hear of him, because he'll give you high blood pressure just from the lies. You know, on his book, on the cover of his book, he's saying that he was a member of the PLO. As you know, and as everybody who knows the PLO know, that the PLO is not a membership. It's a collection of different Palestinian factions who make up the PLO, but there's no such a thing as somebody that a member of a PLO, because it's not, you could be a member of a Palestinian faction, but you couldn't be a member of the PLO. Before we go, we only have a couple of minutes left, Professor. I want to know, I asked Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, he was my guest in the first hour. Actually, I got him mixed up with you. I asked him this question, but this question is actually for you. How is Israel blackmailing America? You wrote an article about Israel blackmailing America. How are they doing that?
Well, it's as if Israel and the United States, the people in the United States have common values. I think one of the things that Israel has used is the Holocaust, the killing by the Nazis of Jews during World War II and before World War II. This is really a very heinous act, because in the name of the Holocaust victims and appealing...
Professor Petras, I'm talking about, and very quick, we only have 1 minute, I'm talking about Amdocs and Converse Infosys, where they actually have, and they can listen to every phone call that takes place in the United States.
Oh, well, you're talking about something that their information experts have devised. But I want to tell you something.
We have less than a minute left.
I don't care that they listen to our conversation. They should listen to our conversation and realize what criminals they are. I think it may bother people that are fearful of any government surveillance. But for those of us who are speaking the truth to Israeli power, those of us who feel it's very important to take back U.S. policy from this tiny minority that's trying to tell us how our country should be run. I think
Professor, thank you for being with us. We're out of time. Thank you.
No pressures.